The subject of today's video, the Dance of Seven Veils, has been a matter of great research among Christian folks. Most people have often wondered if damsel danced with seven veils, or if it's just the name for the traditional dance. Secondly, questions about the identity of the damsel who danced and the exact reason why John was beheaded has also caught widespread attention. In today's video, we'd be looking deep into this subject in all its details and rich narrative because the story of John, Herod, Herodias, and Salome has been retold through the ages. Writers, artists, and musicians have drawn upon its themes of ambition, betrayal, and redemption. Oscar Wilde's play Salome and Richard Strauss's opera brought the tale to life in dramatic and haunting ways. Yet beyond the artistic interpretations lies a deeper lesson. Let's dig in. In the cold desert landscape of ancient Palestine, a dramatic tale of love, lust, and redemption unfolded. At the heart of this story lies Salome, the seductive stepdaughter of Herod Antipas, and John the Baptist, the fiery prophet who dared to challenge the unpardonable betrayal of Herod and Herodias. The story begins long before the popular dance that ended John the Baptist's entire life. It starts with Herod Philip, a man of noble birth and high standing in the society, who was betrayed by the one closest to him, his wife Herodias. Herod Philip, a ruler in his own right and brother to Herod Antipas, lived a relatively quiet life compared to his very greedy brother. His marriage to Herodias seemed, on the surface, to be beautiful and enviable. But behind the curtains where every man faces his shame squarely, Herodias was restless, unhappy, and incomplete. She was a woman of insatiable ambition, one who hungered for power and fame at all cost. Even her husband in all his honor could never fully satisfy it. The more fame she got, the crazy she went to acquiring much more possessions. Herodias's opportunity for a life of endless luxury came when she laid her eyes on Herod Antipas during a family gathering. Gosh. Antipas was bold, cunning in speech, and the very definition of Prince Charming. She could literally feel shivers down her spine. She couldn't get her eyes off him. He had every single feather she desired, that Philip, her sluggish and dull husband, lacked. Right where she was seated, she devised plans on how to get her husband's brother on her lap. The script in her head would definitely fit in as the best movie of the year, because it was very subtle and full of compound interest. She smiles mischievously as she adjusts herself on the sofa. Their idea seemed too good to fall short. I mean, if I can secure Antipas's affections, I'd abandon my stagnant life with Philip and ascend to greater heights, she thought within herself. This very one is a jackpot, and she would go any height or length to have the big meat. After all, to eat at the devil's table one must have a long fork. Herodias put on her A-game, deceitfully presented her idea to Antipas, and luckily for her, Antipas was a thief who just needed a companion. He was more than willing to slice his brother's throat if it was a ticket to power. What Herod thought was just a business proposal also has a bedroom session attached to it. Such full package. Like they say, love is blind to only those in love. Whispers of their illicit affair began circulating in the palace. To the shock of many, Herodias abandoned her husband and married Antipas, a brazen defiance of Jewish law, which prohibited a man from marrying his brother's wife while his brother was still alive. In the heart of this moral storm stood John the Baptist, a fiery prophet whose voice thundered against injustice and sin. He was not a man to mince words, even if it meant condemning the powerful. John, who is the forerunner of Christ, was no ordinary man. He lived in the wilderness wearing garments of camel's hair and surviving on locusts and wild honey. People from all walks of life sought him out, drawn by his powerful sermons about repentance and the coming of God's kingdom. When he heard of the scandal, he walked up to Herod and his partner in crime and condemned them publicly. He rubbed their shame to their faces. Not only was he disappointed, he was also very irritated. But everything he said that day was like him pouring water into a basket, because the more he talked, the more Herodias felt like chopping his head off already. It was brutal. John's rebuke of Herodias and Antipas' union was fierce and public. He called it what it was, a transgression of divine law and a betrayal of sacred values. He was the kind of man to call a spade even if it was nicely packed. John's words were more than a personal insult. They were a threat. In a region where religion and politics were deeply high valued, his condemnation threatened to cripple Antipas's already weak standing among the Jewish people. Herodias was mad. How dare John stand head-on to drag her in the mud? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Her new husband, on the other hand, simply dismissed John's words as the rantings of a religious fanatic, but she could not. Her pride was wounded and her ambitions were at stake. She began to plot her revenge. Herodias, being a cunning woman, schemed a plan and dared Herod Antipas to get John behind bars if he was truly powerful. It was such a tricky spot to be, as he was torn between fear and respect for John, but for his ego's sake he succumbed to imprisoning him. The prophet was captured in the wilderness, where he had baptized many and called the people to repentance. Bound in chains, John was taken to Machaerus, a fortress built high above the Dead Sea, isolated and dark, far away from civilization, the only fitting place for silencing a man whose words carried such weight. Yet even in prison, John's influence remained strong. His followers continued to visit him, seeking guidance and spreading his teachings. Herod himself was alarmed by the prophet. He feared John's connection to the divine, but found himself strangely drawn to his words, often visiting him in the dark confines of the prison. Herodias, however, had no such tenderness of heart. For her, John's continued existence was a threat, a loose end that needed to be tied up. But her husband's fear of John prevented her from acting. She needed a plan, one that would ensure John's death while leaving Herod with no choice but to comply. Several months later, the long-awaited opportunity came in just perfectly on Herod's birthday. A lavish feast was prepared. Nobles, officials, and prominent figures from across the region gathered in the royal palace. The wine flowed, music filled the air, and laughter echoed through the halls. Among the guests was Salome, Herodias' young daughter she had for her first husband, Herod Philip, known for her beauty, elegance, and uncommon grace. While everyone was carried away by the jolly party, Herodias was consumed in thought. She kept devising a means to set her plan in motion. She had a terrible plan, and Salome was the key. Herodias' daughter, Salome, had grown into a stunning young woman whose beauty turned heads wherever she went. Herodias knew that Salome's charm could be her greatest weapon. That evening, she whispered her plan into her daughter's ear. Although Salome hesitated at first but eventually gave in to Mother's irresistible sugar-coated words. At her mother's urging, Salome agreed to perform a dance for the guests. It was no ordinary dance. It was an enchanting display of skill and seductive beauty, later romanticized as the Dance of the Seven Veils. As Salome moved gracefully before the crowd, all eyes were fixed on her. She entered into the hall, draped in silks and jewels, her movements as fluid as a river. Her dance was unlike anything the guests had ever seen, graceful yet provocative, mesmerizing yet baffling. The air seemed to be spiced up with an otherworldly energy as she moved, each step drawing her audience deeper to her spell. In fact, Herod himself was captivated. His judgment became clouded by lustful admiration and the effects of strong wine. When the dance ended, the room erupted in thunderous applause. Overcome with delight, Herod made a reckless promise. "Ask me for anything," he declared, "and I will give it to you, even if it is half my kingdom." Salome turned to her mother, seeking for answers. Herodias gave a knowing smile. The set time has come. She seized the opportunity she had long awaited. She whispered her demand into Salome's ear once again. The hall fell silent as Salome approached her stepfather, and without hesitation, the young girl relayed the shocking request. "I want the head of John the Baptist on a plate." Herod's smile faded away like a shadow. He had not expected such a demand. He glanced at Herodias, who met his gaze with a look of cold determination. He knew he had been trapped. His oath, made before all his guests, could not be broken without him losing face. It was a tough decision, but the order was given. A soldier descended into the dark, damp cell where John was kept. The prophet met his end with the same courage that had defined his life, unyielding in his commitment to truth and justice. Moments later, the severed head of John the Baptist was brought into the banquet hall, presented on a silver platter. Salome carried it to her mother, who received it with a wide smile of satisfaction. Herod's lust for power and Herodias' thirst for revenge led to a tragedy that exposed the darkness of their dirty heart. Salome, caught in her mother's web, became an unwitting puppet in a story of greed and manipulation. But the victory was short-lived. Herodias' revenge did not bring her the peace she sought. Herod was haunted by the memory of John, and whispers of the prophet's righteousness spread far and wide. Salome, too, later came to regret her role in the bloody affair. Just when everyone thought the whole dust of John's gruesome death was beginning to settle, another tragic drama unfolded. Herod Antipas's rule had just hit the rock bottom. His marriage to Herodias alienated his Jewish subjects and angered his former father-in-law, King Aretas IV, leading to a military defeat that many saw as divine punishment. Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee and Perea, was eventually abolished due to political rivalry and his own reckless ambitions. His downfall was tied to his too close relationship with Rome, his mismanagement of power, and his eventual betrayal by his nephew Agrippa I. For a long time, unknown to many, Herod Antipas had always walked a delicate tightrope as a client ruler under the Roman Empire. His authority depended on maintaining the favor of the Roman emperor. Despite his ability to rule effectively for a time, his ambitions for greater power and his questionable alliances eventually led to his destruction. Despite knowing this secret, Herodias, his ambitious and manipulative woman, fueled Herod's desire for even greater status and authority, leading him to make increasingly reckless decisions. Herod's downfall came to public knowledge when his nephew, Agrippa I, came into the picture. Agrippa had spent time in Rome and cultivated close relationships with influential figures, including Emperor Caligula. When Agrippa returned to Judea, he began to seek greater authority, typically at the expense of his uncle. Agrippa capitalized on Herod's weaknesses. He accused Herod of plotting against Rome and aspiring to the title of king, a claim that angered the emperor. At the time, such accusations were taken seriously, as they threatened the stability of the empire. Herodias, as expected, encouraged Herod to demand the title of king from Emperor Caligula. This move backfired almost immediately, as Agrippa, who had already been granted the title of king by Caligula, used his influence to destroy Herod. He accused Herod of treason, presenting evidence to the emperor that painted Herod as disloyal and power-hungry. In response to Agrippa's accusations, Emperor Caligula summoned Herod to Rome. After hearing the charges, Caligula stripped Herod of his title and territories. He then banished Herod and Herodias to Gaul, modern-day France, where they lived the remainder of their lives in poverty and disgrace. Agrippa I, in turn, was rewarded for his loyalty to Rome and replaced Herod as ruler, gaining control over Galilee and Perea. Herod Antipas's banishment marked the end of his oppressive rule and serves as a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, poor judgment, and the dangers of political misconduct. His failure to navigate the complex relationships with Rome and his family ultimately led to his ugly end, leaving him as a figure overshadowed by his more successful relatives and his infamous role in the death of John the Baptist. Now let's look at why the dance is called the Dance of Seven Veils. Salome's dance is called the Dance of the Seven Veils because of its symbolic and dramatic origins in literature and mythology, rather than any historical or biblical reference. The term originates from Oscar Wilde's 1891 play Salome, in which he portrays her performing a seductive dance to win Herod's favor and secure the beheading of John the Baptist. Wilde described this dance as involving 7 veils, which Salome removes one by one. In Wilde's play, the dance is overly sensual, emphasizing Salome's control over Herod through seduction. Although Wilde's play popularized the idea, no biblical account describes Salome dancing with veils. This detail is a creative addition, blending Orientalist themes with Western fascination for exoticism and mystery in the late 19th century. Summarily, while Herod, Herodias, and Salome are remembered for their roles in a dark chapter of history, John the Baptist is celebrated as a prophet and a martyr. His voice, though silenced by the sword, still echoes across the centuries, calling people to repentance and reminding them of the power of truth. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye for now. God bless you.